Jesus sent the disciples out 2 by 2. You ever wonder why? Did you think about that? Well, why didn't he just send them out as a group? Well, think about your own life in your own house. You're relaxed, the doorbell rings, and you open the door and there's 1 or 2 people there, and you're very comfortable with that. But what happens if you open your door and you're faced with this? Now, I don't think the disciples look like this, but if you're not expecting a crowd, they could look like this, no matter what they're there for. But I think there's 2 reasons he sent them out 2 by 2. The first is they could cover more territory. The second reason, I think probably the main reason, is going together with another person, you support one another. When times get tough, you hold one another up. When times are good, you celebrate together. You're in this whole thing together. This spring, my wife Sherry and I decided to take a road trip for 3 weeks through 7 western states. It's not easy being in a car with the same person for 3 weeks, but we made it. The first week, a little because of the weather. In fact, we woke up in the morning in Cheyenne and faced this. You really can't tell, but there actually is a foot of snow on the car. They closed Interstate 80 from Cheyenne, from Laramie to Cheyenne. We were in Laramie, excuse me. They closed the road. What are we going to do? The hotel was booked for that night, but about 11 a.m. they announced that the road was now open. So we questioned whether we should go or not, and we finally decided to go. So we headed off to Cheyenne, and this is what it looked like. Looks pretty clear, but what you can't see in the fast lane, it's all slush and ice. Nobody was using the fast lane for that 30 miles. In fact, during that 30 miles, we probably saw a dozen incidents where trucks or cars had slid off the road into the ditch. But we made it. We made it to the next day. The next day, though, we got up, and we were going to head for another mountain pass, 2-lane, windy road, narrow, and it was snowing. With no change, what are we going to do? I didn't want to drive it. Sherry definitely didn't want to ride it. So we decided to take a different route, and instead of driving 180 miles, we drove 500 miles. But the important thing is we had each other to support one another. That and saying the rosary every morning before we left got us through that. And we ended up seeing some of God's wonderful creation. Got to ride the choo-choo train in the Colorado Rockies. That's my favorite. My dad was a railroad engineer. And we got to see the Painted Desert. Then the Grand Canyon. I'm not going to show you all our pictures, so you don't have to worry, but I wanted you to see a couple examples of God's beautiful creation. But we have to stop and think that weather that we hated the first part of the trip, that was our weakness, because that is also God's creation. And in fact, without that weather, these things don't happen. So we have to remember that when stuff goes wrong. It's all part of God's plan. But you know, we were 2 by 2, the disciples were 2 by 2, but sometimes there's a job that requires everybody working together. You can't do it with just 2. Today in the world are many people who do not have the freedom to decide where they're going or what they're going to do. As we here today celebrate our nation's birthday and the freedom that we have, Sherry and I had the freedom to decide where we were going, what we were doing. The disciples had the freedom to decide whether they were going to follow Jesus or not. But there are millions of people who don't have that freedom. They have somebody else who's telling them what to do and when to do it. Whether you call it slavery or human trafficking, it's all the same thing. In fact, today there are more people in slavery than at any other time in written human history. How many? Well, these are 3 estimates from 3 different organizations. because there's no way to actually go around and count everybody who's toiling under slavery. 30 million, that's the number of people that live in Canada. 36 million, that's the number of people who live in California. Imagine everybody here and all our neighbors throughout California being slaves. The numbers are staggering. Where are these people? Well, in our nice, safe homes here, we like to think that they're in maybe third world countries like Bangladesh or Myanmar. Or maybe they're the refugees who are trying to escape from an oppressive government or violence in their homeland, and in their weakest moments come under the control of those who will overtake them. But believe it or not, you know where these people live? Down the street. They live right here in our communities with us. We don't always see them, but they're there. The first conviction of human trafficking in California occurred in Walnut Creek. It was an example of domestic servitude. They had a nanny for their children that they treated like a slave. Just this spring, a large prostitution ring was broken up in San Jose and in San Ramon, in Danville, and right here in Fremont. Operations in all 4 cities closed down. So it's not somewhere else in the world, it is right here. What are we going to do about it? Well, the task is enormous, so we need to break it down into steps we can do. 10, 10, 10. What can we do in 10 minutes? What can we do in 10 days? And what can we do in 10 months? Well, in 10 minutes, we can learn the National Human Trafficking Hotline, 888-3737-888. If you know somebody who is being trafficked, you can call and report it there if you don't feel comfortable reporting it to your local police department. Or if you have a question, you see something that's kind of weird, you're not sure, call them and they'll step you through it. That conviction in Walnut Creek, that occurred because the school teacher called because they didn't understand why these children were always so clean and neat and everything else, and the nanny kept showing up in the same clothes, dirty clothes, every day. So they called, and that's how that one happened. So it's up to you. Call. 10 days, get informed, see a movie, read a book, check online. In fact, if you Google 888-3737-888, they'll take you to their website. A lot of good information on human trafficking on that website, and a lot of statistics broken down by states. How many reports of human trafficking are there in each state? The numbers, again, are staggering. 10 months, get involved. Whether that's being actively involved in an organization that is working against human trafficking, trying to get it stopped, or it's maybe a passive involvement, praying, or maybe when you spend your dollar for that item that's less expensive than the one next to it, was that item made by people who are toiling under the slavery? Was that made by people who are victims of human trafficking? Ten, 10, 10. Learn the number, get informed, be involved. Well, our church is getting involved. The Catholic Charities of the East Bay, with the bishop, are partnering with Alameda County's district attorney. They're in the midst of establishing 5 safe houses, 4 for girls, 1 for boys. A safe house where the people, when they're ready to escape that servitude, have a safe place to go. A place where they can realize that they have self-worth. A place where they can rebuild up their self-image. A place where they can be safe from those who have been controlling them. This is important because in the United States today, there are over 100,000 teen sex slaves. And of those, the average age for entering into this being trafficked for girls is 13. For boys, it's 12. And their life expectancy when they first enter into being trafficked is 7 years. Think about that. There are over 100,000 children in the U.S. today who are not expected to see their 21st birthday. What can we do? We need to take that first step. If we don't make that first step, we can't take the second step. Can it be done? Absolutely. Reminds me of the little story, and most of you have probably heard this, but I think it's worth repeating, about the little girl who's going down the seashore. And when she comes across a starfish, she throws it back into the water. And as she's doing this, a man comes up to her and says, "Little girl, why are you doing that? There are thousands of these starfish. You can't make a difference." And as she picked another one up and threw it in the water, she says, "I made a difference for that one." Well, we can also make a difference. I want to introduce you to Grace. Grace is not her real name, and this is not Grace's picture. But this is what Grace looked like, somewhat. All right? I want to protect Grace's privacy. Grace was first trafficked at the age of 3 years. Her mother's boyfriend used her to get drugs. She was taken away from her mother at the age of 6. She was placed into a series of foster homes, and over 7 years, she never spent more than 1 year in the same home. At 13, she gave up on herself and entered into the only life that she knew. She went back to the streets. At 16, she was again taken off the streets and was placed in a home with a couple of foster parents who had the love and the will and the know-how to help Grace regain her self-confidence and her self-worth. And by the grace of God, and now you know why I called her Grace, by the grace of God, the help of those foster parents and the help of the community, this spring, Grace graduated from Georgetown University. It can be done, but we must take that first step. If we can only help one at a time, that's better than not helping any at all. So as I leave you here today, 888-3737-888. Thank you, and God bless.